Just a quick intro. I'm the Director of Consulting here at Pragmatic Works. Today I'll be, you may think, Director, can you talk about this kind of thing? I've been doing a lot of work in Azure and a lot of work in data for most of my career. And one of the things I'm really passionate about is about moving your data onto Azure. And, what does it mean to do that? So the focus today is not just data. We're going to focus down onto SQL Server and just, look at what SQL Server has for you on Azure and really beginning to understand the options that you have available. Let's see here. There we go. So if you're thinking about moving your SQL Server to Azure, there's a lot of things, a lot of reasons you might be considering it. You might be looking at a number of options around it. The big things that, we typically see people doing and trying to understand about that move is as you start to move Azure, how do you plan to model your data for the cloud? What do you want to do for data? Is it moved? Is it just replatforming? We see a lot of, we talked to a lot of customers about the ability to move it in the future. What does it mean? Once I have my data in Azure, now I have more tooling available to me, more options for what I can do with that data and how does it, what's that look like for me in the future? So in our, when we look at Azure, I realize that, you can move to other clouds with the same kind of thing, but we're focused on Azure and we look a lot at things like what does Databricks have to offer now that I have my data here? What is some of the advanced technology, advanced analytics capabilities? Those are the kind of things that people want to take advantage of as you make the move. Then, we actually are working with a number of folks on describing the changes to the DBA's job. It changes your job. You'll find right away if you're looking at making this move, and a number of you are, based on the poll information, well over half of you are looking at moving data or having more of your data in Azure. And if you're a DBA and you're looking at what your current job is and how it fits in DBA in the role, ironically, SQL Server on Azure still needs a lot of the same skill set you have today. What you're going to find is certain things that were really important that you dealt with on a day-to-day basis may not be as important. Are you managing memory on your box? Are you doing, trying to make sure your VM stays in alignment? You may not have to deal with that as much. But instead, you may be really concerned about what's my firewall rules. Things you didn't care about before now become important because you're in Azure, and these are some of the things we're going to look at. If you're looking at building new solutions or applications, my number one recommendation to everyone is take a moment, step back, be cloud ready. If you don't build your new work or your new application strategically with cloud readiness in mind, you are cutting yourself very short on what you have as capability moving forward. And we see, folks go about it and they're like, oh yeah, we're going to be cloud ready, but they didn't pay attention to the actual functionality. It's an interesting process. We walk through some of the key aspects of what's available. You move to Azure and what it looks like. It's really important to pay attention to those details. You may think, this won't be a big deal, and it turns out maybe it is a bigger deal because you didn't plan for something like access to the file system being required will limit your capability to move to a cloud solution. These are the things that you have to take into consideration as we look at it. So let's look at the options first, kind of what we're moving to Azure. So I would say in general, you heard the in general word there. There are 3 targets for a SQL Server workload to move. And what guides that is what we're going to talk about today because they are different. So Azure SQL Database, which is the 2 on the left, basically have 2 key variations, managed instance and single database. So Azure SQL Database is the underlying relational platform supporting platform as a service. And the platform as a service options, the key options on the SQL Server side or SQL Server equivalent side are single database and managed instance. If you're looking at your whole data estate, Azure SQL Database, or that platform, also supports PostgreSQL, MySQL, and MariaDB. So they're all on the same platform. So there's core tenets to everything that you do on those platforms. It also is the same platform that is the basis for Azure SQL Data Warehouse, which we'll talk about here in a second. The other real option that you have out there is the SQL Server and Azure VMs. So sometimes you can't actually bring your current on-premise solution to the cloud without going to the VM. And that raises its own set of concerns, but it is a legitimate target, and you have to plan for it accordingly. I'll take a moment here. If you're running SQL 2008 and you're looking for migration options, we'll talk about migration options a little bit more at the end as well. But typically, you're targeting either the VM solution or the managed instance solution, because both those are your best options as you move forward. A couple questions I have on the slide are, what about SQL Data Warehouse? Well, we're not really talking about SQL Data Warehouse in the context of putting SQL Server on Azure. Now that you could say, hey, I'm running APS, in which case, give us a call. We'll walk you through that solution. Moving your current appliance, whether it's Teradata, Netezza, or Microsoft's Parallel Data Warehouse. Any of those are options to move to Azure Data Warehouse. It's an appliance play in most cases. However, if you are looking at doing a large data warehouse solution, if it's a data warehouse, it's a good fit. If it's a transactional system, Azure SQL Data Warehouse is not a good fit, and we'd look at other options for you. Then, what about SQL Database Elastic Pools? Well, this is just the number of single databases that are sharing resources, so the functionality is roughly the same. So I did not bring them up as a separate option. If you choose to use Elastic Pools, this is really more of an opportunity to share resources across multiple databases. Depending on those database workloads, will determine whether or not that's actually a valid solution or not for you. And we just want to make sure that we're handling that correctly for you. But that's what Elastic Pools are about, is more about sharing of resources, not necessarily the functionality within the context of that. So these are the targets we'll be focusing on today, is the managed instance, the single database, and the VMs. And you'll see me use some of the language interchangeably throughout the deck, but you should always see something about managed instance, single database, and VMs on any type of topics that we cover. The top considerations that I want to call out, and you'll notice that there's other considerations. You may have specific things to what you're doing, but what I want to call out are these 4 areas in particular, so that we can actually talk reasonably about what is available in each of the platforms which we're looking at, or moving to Azure in general, or the impact for you on SQL Server as you move forward. So the four areas that I really want to focus on are operational ease, which is really, how does it change how you operate? What's operationally different? Is it good, better, otherwise? Everybody has security as a key part of their environment, and they want to know that they're moving to a secure environment, because if, with all the data security that's involved, you want to make sure that you're headed the right direction for that. Functional equivalence. This is usually where we, everybody focuses on a lot. Well, can I do the same things? Well, it depends. What are you trying to do? How are you currently leveraging SQL Server? What are the components you're using? Let's talk about some of the key differences between the 3 major targets on what you're able to do versus not. And then we'll look at the migration options of moving forward, and what tools are available to help you move easily into the cloud, and what that would mean for you. Operational ease. So I'm focused on 3 areas in operational ease. There are more, but I want to make sure that we start with at least the obvious ones that people see or hear about all the time. The first one is an interesting one, because everybody hears that, hey, once you go to PaaS, or Platform as a Service solutions, this is in particular the SQL database, or the single database, or the managed instance versions of Azure SQL Database. Patches and updates are applied by Microsoft. My life is easy. I don't have to do patch management. Yay me. So I had a great conversation with some of our DBAs and folks on the team to talk about this, and one of the things that they were running into is that some of those updates and some of those patches still cause issues. You have some less control around that, but for the most part, this is something that happens seamlessly in the background. Microsoft gives out information. It would do you well to pay attention to the updates coming from Microsoft, so you should follow the blog posts from Microsoft on Azure and changes to the data platform in Azure and what that means, so you know what's coming, so you can plan accordingly. SQL on VMs require you to still patch. So if you look at the biggest difference between the Platform as Service options and the VM option, is that you own the VM. The VM is, if you decide that you're going to push SQL Server 2012 onto a VM, and you're going to run it on Windows 2000, whichever the new version is, 2019, those kind of things, whatever that version of Windows you want to run that on, You get it all in there, and now you're like, oh, great, I've got it. This feels just like what I did it in my own data centers, because it is just like when you did it in your own data center. And you are now fully responsible to manage patching and updates to SQL Server, including version updates. One of the interesting things about Platform as a Service solutions is they're running versionless these days. And so as you start looking at what that means, they do have compatibility modes, make sure functionality that you wanted or has changed. You can run in compatibility modes. Those of you who've done upgrades are very much aware of what a compatibility mode is. And it basically says, hey, well, we're going to turn the features on or off based on what version we're doing. So as we look into the future right now, one of the questions I had for the Microsoft team related to this very thing was, as they start running a versionless environment, we look at the big release coming in 2019, and all the changes happen to SQL Server. That means we're going to get a new compatibility mode in our Platform as a Service solutions. Is that going to be turned on automatically? Is it something we can turn on when we want to? And the answer is, we'll get to turn that on our time. So compatibility is something that we can run. So we don't actually have to take on everything, but you can actually choose to have it automatically handled for you. I highly recommend, like in any scenario, that you let automation happen with a grain of salt a little bit there, and say, I'm fine getting the patches and updates, which I really, they happen behind the scenes. But when we talk about switching from 2017 to 2019 functionality and feature set, the logical equivalence of that in my compatibility modes, I want to have more control over that. You have the option to do that. But at the end of the day, there is no version. The nice part here is we talk about migrations. You can migrate right to managed instance, and it can actually run in the same compatibility mode, but there's no versions, there's no updates, no upgrades from that perspective as far as you are. As far as you're concerned, additional functionality becomes available. You just choose whether or not you make it available to your developers or not. So that's the first piece. It's, a lot of us have built scripts over the years, things like that, to help us manage patches, and we roadblock these things. Some of that we lose some of that control, but at the same time, we have to weigh out what is our risk in doing that, and how much do we have to worry about in that scenario. One of the things I really like about moving to Platform as a Service in particular is the automated backup scenario. So one of the things to be aware of is that everything that goes on to managed instance or onto single database has at least a 7-day recovery period. So a point-in-time recovery at least every 5 minutes. You're able to go back and recover your data. If you think about what the purpose of backups are, you need to, this is one of those things where people have questioned, especially in the single database realm, where you don't really have a lot of other options around creating backups. A lot of it's automated for you. It's behind the scenes. So if you're running the single database mode, you're like, all right, it says I have backups, but I can't touch and feel them. I don't know what to do about it. And then you have to realize, what is the purpose of a backup? Most of the time, if I'm recovering from a backup, I'm actually not doing it because I had a system go down or I had a system issue. It's usually because I had a user issue. Somebody deleted an entire table. I got to go restore the database and recover that data and have to do work. You have the same feature set available to you in Platform as a Service, just built in. It's already there for you. So you really, as you work through that process and you start looking at what's easy about it, I don't have to set all that up. It's there for me, ready to be used. The managed instance version of Azure SQL Database allows you to actually run a backup command and create a backup file and create your own backups as well. And you might do that for any number of reasons, for data retention or whatever the requirements are around that. But managed instance allows you more functionality to do that. VMs are just like you're on SQL Server. You're going to run formal backups. You're going to manage it yourself. There is no automated backup. So whereas managed instance gives you the automated backup plus the ability to do formal backups, VMs don't give you that capability. You don't get the automated backup capability inside of SQL Server. Anything you do like that has to be done on your own. I have disaster recovery here. Before I talk about disaster recovery, I want to talk about high availability. Usually those get bundled together. The one thing about high availability in the Platform as a Service scenario is that it's built in. You essentially get 3 copies within the data centers that you're working in, and so you have automatic failover built into your environment. Usually it's seamless. You don't notice it if it does happen. So if there's a hardware failure, network failure, those kind of things, Microsoft is managing that failure for you in the background. And high availability is built in and included into every version of Platform as a Service. So a single database has it, as well as managed instance. Once again, if you're going to do high availability on a VM, you're going to have to add VMs. And you'll see when I talk about pricing, that one of the big misnomers is people price out comparatively a single VM running SQL Server. They price match it against what they see in Platform as a Service without actually getting feature functionality compared, the similarities. So we've talked about that, so I don't have it on the slide, but high availability is built in and is just a part of Platform as a Service. When you get into disaster recovery, it does require a little more setup and configuration and work. You are going to look at using data solutions within the Azure framework. A couple things to keep in mind is, as you would done the DR on site, you would say, I need to pick my data center. Follow the prescriptive guidance from Microsoft. One of the nice things here is that Microsoft has set up certain data centers that are paired, and they're great for disaster recovery and failover solutions like that. So if it's something you have to do, or you're in a process where you always fail over from one data center to another, Microsoft actually has paired data centers to allow for a higher level of performance between those centers, as well as a more seamless experience when it comes to a failover approach using disaster recovery scenarios. So that would apply for the SQL database solutions, but it also applies for the VMs, because you can set your VMs and do the similar type of operations with VMs at the VM level to do the same type of failover. So these are operational ease things. So as you start looking at the cloud, you're looking to reduce what you're doing. These are some of the basics that are out there. Look for a white paper coming from us for DBAs about what's changing for them as they go to cloud. That white paper is going to have even more information around some of these pieces that I'm talking about. Operational ease, operationally, what changes, what doesn't really change. A lot doesn't change. I mean, we're not talking about changing how we do indexing, a lot of this other stuff. A lot of the stuff is available on-prem. It's also available in the cloud. Automated indexing, those kind of things. A lot of that feature set is the same across every Microsoft SQL Server platform. So I'm calling out some differences so you know them, but the reality is a lot of what's on-prem is already in the cloud, and you're looking at things that make a difference. These are some things that make a difference. Securing your environment. There is a couple things to really be aware of. Compliance, I have the compliance thing up here. If you're not familiar with compliance across Microsoft's data platform, you need to go out to the Trust Center. So if you go out to the Microsoft Trust Center, just search for that. You're going to see that where the levels of compliance for the platform are. Keep in mind, Microsoft only takes compliance so far. If you choose to open things up and to make yourself non-compliant, that is your choice. Whereas they build platforms that allow you to be compliant across the board, from PII data, so PCI compliance, to also dealing with like SOC rules. There's a lot of stuff out there Microsoft has in different environments. What applies, what doesn't apply, those kind of things. The Active Directory versus SQL logins versus Active Directory. So Azure Active Directory versus Active Directory and SQL logins. What does all that mean? If you are currently in that group of folks who only have like 25% of your data in your cloud, and you may or may not have Azure Active Directory fully implemented, just plan on it. If you're going to move to Azure, you need to make sure that you are moving to Azure Active Directory. And then you have to make a decision whether you want to use SQL logins or Azure Active Directory to manage your security from that perspective. What I will tell you is that if you're using Azure Active Directory and SQL logins, it'll work across your platform, whether you're using VMs or Platform as a Service options. It doesn't really matter. You're going to have to deal with the change in Active Directory. Active Directory can still be used in a VM scenario, assuming you have all your networking set up correctly and it can see your DC. But if I'm going to make a recommendation, I will tell you right now, if you're going to the cloud, excuse me, if you're going to the cloud, you should be looking at using Azure Active Directory and implementing it, because you're going to need it at some point, and it's going to be really important to set it up well. It's probably one of the biggest areas where we see people who have kind of run ahead a little bit of their security and networking team to get things done. They now have to bring it back into compliance with Azure Active Directory, and that's one of those things you want to make sure you're doing. So when we look at Platform as a Service, some other things to be aware of. Azure SQL database, a single database, has a public endpoint. This was raised a number of people's concerns about, well, that means I can access it via the internet. Now, that is true. Let's not hide the fact that you can access Azure SQL database through essentially a .databases.windows.net kind of connection. So you are basically given an address and say, I can hit it and go. Does that make it less secure? Well, it does if you set your firewalls up to open up all the ports and all the IP address ranges. That makes it not so secure. It comes out of the box secure. You can only access that public endpoint if you have access to SQL Server, and if you have been given access via the firewall rules. So often, we know as consultants that one of the things we deal with is this exact thing, and folks don't want to make that public endpoint available to just anybody developing. So we often will use a jump box even for development inside the environment, keeping the public endpoint blocked with firewalls. So just be aware that that is a scenario, and that it's there by default. There's no way to actually turn it off. You can join a VNet, that type of thing, and add more security to Azure SQL database, but the public endpoint is a part of the product. The managed instance, on the other hand, does not have a public endpoint open by default. They have the ability to use an NSG rule to open up an endpoint if you want to, but overall it's not done. It's completely secure within the VNet, which means that nobody without access to your network or your virtual network inside of Azure cannot access it. This level of security of managed instance was a key reason managed instance was brought on board. It is a full lockdown scenario, if you think of it like that. This is not something that would be trivial to both either set up well or to make it so it's less secure. You actually have to be intentional about opening up the endpoint, and it's definitely the more secure option within the platform as a service products because of how it's set up. So highly secure, really set up well. You will need networking expertise in order to set it up correctly. I highly recommend working with a network engineer, or if you're comfortable as a DBA working on networks, it's definitely something you're going to need to deal with. When it comes to virtual machines, really an IS scenario is an IS scenario. You're going to have to create your virtual networks. You're going to have to secure everything. You're going to have to manage your VMs like you would in an on-premises scenario. It's not a whole lot different. So you're not dealing with things already pre-built or restrictions built in to prevent access in certain scenarios. It's all one of those deals where look at the VMs and it's secured and based on what you do. So the platform as a service, are certain things that Microsoft guarantees around that security, about what they do and how they protect the walls. So be aware of the scenarios between all of them. But at the end of the day, everything running in Azure starts out secure, as I think is a good way of looking at it. And then as you start to open things up to provide functionality, make sure you're aware of what you're opening up and making sure you're not leaving yourself exposed for any type of attack or the type of issue around that. The next topic is functional equivalence. Now, I'm going to go through some key comparison notes. I'm not going to, there's a huge list out there on docs.microsoft.com about what's available where. And I'm bringing to you kind of the functionality that actually matters the most when we talk with customers about moving to the cloud. And I've even highlighted some of those in bold where we actually have either ran into the issues or it's a key thing to consider. So I want to start talking through that. So we start from left to right. On single database, most of your T-SQL is covered. There's hardly anything that's not. Functional T-SQL is almost 100% coverage in there. I don't think there's anything except for specifics around, where other functionality is dependent on something. But for the most part, you're not going to run into problems creating tables, executing queries, building store procedures. Most of that stuff is going to just be there for you. Automatic tuning is available across every one of these on the platform. It's really based on what you see. Temporal tables are included in single database, row level security, high availability. I talked a lot about high availability before, but it's included by default. It's there. So you have that, and so much more is in there. So if you're looking at a solution and you can get it on a single database, you might find it's the best option for you if you don't need all the other things that come with managed instance, or you're not looking for full equivalence, but you're looking for efficiencies. We see a lot of people doing, you know, application work, new application work, and leveraging a single database very successfully because they started there. That means the limitations they would have had because they tried to use functionality that wasn't available, they're not hitting that. So, you know, Azure SQL Database has been around a long time. It's the fastest to bring up online and the easiest to start using. So it's a very easy platform to get there from here, but it's not necessarily the greatest migration target. So that brings us to managed instance. Managed instance actually has backup and restore, not just backup, but the backup command is what I highlighted here, but also the restore command. So you can actually back up to a .bak file, to a standard backup file, and restore from that file in managed instance. There are specific rules around how you do it, but it is very possible to do that, and it's one of the recommended approaches for even bringing your database up to Azure. Change data capture is available in managed instance. CLR, with the exception of CLR functionality, requires file system access because there is none. So for the most part, a lot of your custom functions, all that work just fine in managed instance. One of the big keys that we see is cross-database functionality. One of the things you cannot do in single database, you can use elastic database functionality, but it's not the same. Cross-database functionality on a managed instance means if you have multiple databases in that instance, you can query to them. So if you have a situation where you've traditionally had multiple databases and you've actually allowed for us to, you know, write a 4-part name or a 3-part name and get to the other database, you can do the same thing in managed instance as long as it's on the on the same instance. But you get that functionality, something that wasn't available in single database. They brought the kind of a logical equivalence in elastic database queries, but it's not the same. So people were frustrated with that. This gives you exactly what you expect to see in cross-database functionality. DB Mail and Service Broker are both available. Service Broker says limited. Go look at the limitations, but at a high level, Service Broker works within the context of the instance. It doesn't really work outside of that. So just be aware of that. And then we now have SQL Server Agent back. So those of you who desperately wanted to schedule on SQL Server Agent can now get that in managed instance. So as we go to the SQL and VM, everything's on the SQL and VM because you're basically, whatever's on-prem, you're bringing it forward. When we looked at migration targets, and, you know, what are the pieces that people were really missing, the biggest blocker for us was anything that required access to the file system. Yeah, we've had a couple of people use extended store procedures, but we looked at the use case, and a lot of times we could eliminate the use case and find a way around it, do it differently, right? So without it being a significant change to their platform. But file stream, that one, that's been the number one, issue around, looking at SQL Server as a platform as a service versus on a VM. Anytime we've seen file stream, it's immediately we have to recommend VM, and that's a big deal. If that's something you have in your functionality, then and you want to retain that without rewriting all your code, because how would you deal with the same thing on platform as a service? You'd actually store all your data in blob storage. It's not a bad thing. It's fairly easy to handle. It's just that you'd have to rewrite any code so it can handle that. So file stream, other things that aren't there, extended store procedures I talked about. Attaching and detaching a database is not available except for on a VM. And currently today, Polybase, with the exception of running on Azure Data Warehouse, it's not supported in single database or managed instance either. This brings us down to the migration options, which this is the next big piece of what we're doing and want to talk about. The Azure Data Migration Assistant, if you're looking to migrate, this is definitely a plus. You need to go grab this tool. It's free to use. You bring it, you do an assistant, and it'll generate an assessment. It will tell you whether, what works going to a single database, what works going to managed instance, and what needs to be on a VM. It will tell you what works and what doesn't. You can make decisions based on that information. Those decisions, you may make a decision to hold off on a migration for 1 or 2 months just to fix some of the issues that are there, so you can take advantage of platform as a service more readily. So it's really important that you work with someone like us on the assistant, or if you want to run it yourself, you can do that as well. The migration service takes information from the assistant and really allows you to look at supporting online and offline migrations. So at this point, you're like, what's the difference? Well, online will allow you to basically incrementally migrate, whereas offline lets you do it kind of one at a time or all at once. So depending on how you want to do your migration or what you need to do, the migration service supports both. Migrating the platform as a service. I added this slide because I wanted people to see that managed instances nearly 100%. That's a real important thing to understand. You're able to do backup and restore. So you could back up I've done this multiple times, back up a 2008 database, for instance. You can restore it to managed instance, and it works. And that'll, it's a great thing. It allows you to actually do a quick and easy upgrade of a solution that is probably outdated and not so well. It's definitely not supported by Microsoft anymore. You can also use the data migration service for that to move it over. You can also do that with single database. The data migration service actually target that as well. So these are just some of your migration options. You're looking forward to taking advantage of those clouds and what that would mean. It's really key to be, to keep in mind that you're one of your best targets overall within Azure is the managed instance. Is why I brought this into here. Making a choice. I'm sure this will raise all kinds of fun questions. I gave you my 5 blocks. I got I added the server node in there, and I added a price for 1 terabyte database with all the caveats of this may or may not be true for you. All right, so let's look through these. So operational ease. Single database is the easiest one to manage because it has the least amount of things you have to deal with in order to move things through single database. Managed instance is a little bit harder. You have more networking and more security to deal with on your own. And then virtual machines, of course, is, the operational ease is logical equivalent to what you have on-prem. It's just that you don't actually manage the VM itself as far as how it works. You just say, hey, I want to take a VM, and you can increase and decrease size, those kind of things. That's all managed for you. Security, really single database has the external endpoint. That's the biggest consideration there. Managed instance is VNet secured, and then of course virtual machine you're doing it self-management. Functionality, obviously we talked through all this where managed instance gives you the highest level of compatibility to platform and service side. When you're looking at migration, one thing I will say about single database is probably the best option to look at Greenfield. If you haven't tried it yet, I would look there first. But I would definitely compare it with managed instance because at the end of the day, from a migration standpoint, managed instance is easy. You can do backup restore, virtual machines, you can do backup restore or detach, attach, depending on your options. The only real option you have from a migration standpoint, single database is using Backpack, and most folks either don't know what that is or don't like using Backpack. So if you want to do greenfield work in single database, that makes a lot of sense, easy to do. It's also good if you have a lot of databases and you end up using Elastic to support your storage options. Let's look at the server consideration. So a single database is completely managed. It's really managed at the database level. And that's something to keep in mind is that a single database is exactly that. It's one database, and it's tagged to a server, but the server is kind of a virtual collection of databases, not really a server. The managed instance is actually a virtual instance that you're getting to use. So you can put multiple databases in that instance, and you're charged for the instance, just so we're clear on that. And this gives you cross-database functionality, those kind of things like we're talking about. But that's really the biggest difference between managed instance and a single database is the idea that there is more of a server component to the managed instance. And then a virtual machine, of course, is all self-managed. You can have multiple instances on a VM. You have multiple databases just like you can in-house. Here's where the fun begins. So I wanted to do a slight price comparison, and I want to call out a few things so you are aware of how I did it. I looked at an 8-core solution across the board. General purpose, I did not go for business critical on managed instance in particular, which means that it's not using always on availability periods, but it is highly available. And there's some backup storage and the single database that I added in just because if, I assumed 1 terabyte retention may or may not be true. It's probably high, but it gives you an idea. So if you look at these, I don't break these out. You can go online and run the calculator and see these all yourself. But this is a per month dollars. Now the virtual machine, I wanted to call out that it includes the SQL Server licensing. So none of these actually include any of your discounts. You can Actually reserve capacity for a year, 3 years on all of these, and end up saving quite a bit of money. You can bring your own licenses. You can use hybrid tools. So what you have available to you will change the pricing. What I will tell you is if you go into the process of comparing these, the one big thing about pricing I want you to be aware of is that single database and managed instance are a logical equivalent of a 3 server failover scenario. Virtual machine, I only did 2 servers because typically keeping it as close as possible. That cost was with 8 core, 32 gig of RAM, and a terabyte, actually I think 2 terabytes of storage in the back end, 2 or 3. So that price point, yeah, you could probably get that to come down. If you bring your own license, it'll come down. You can also choose to not use enterprise license and you can use standard if that's what you want to do. I wanted to get the most equivalent of these. So if you want an equivalent function, nearest equivalent functionality, capability, and feature set, you're going to compare 2 VMs running enterprise SQL with a license included. So as you start looking at the numbers, yeah, you could bring that down. It'll probably drop down to about the same price if you brought your own licenses. So then you're offsetting different things in value from that perspective. Point is, dig into it, look at it, look at what you need to do. Reserved instances, I would consider a must in most cases for databases because typically your database will last at least a year, if not 3, without question, allowing you to actually prepay and save up to 20–30% depending on where the model is and what you're doing. So just be aware of that. It's really important to take advantage of those cost discounts. We can help with some of that, but a lot of that, you'll work with your Microsoft vendors on what you're doing. But frankly, you can go out to the calculator and figure out a lot of it on your own. But we'd be happy to help with all that. So I just want you to be aware of that's kind of how I priced it, and make sure that you understand that when you go out and look and choose on the platform that you're using, these are the core 3 that you're looking at. Understand the price differences between them. I'm going to give you our final thoughts and kind of our recommendations. We recommend moving to SQL Server database management instances in most cases. And the reason for that is it's got the best mix of functions, the best mix of security, the best mix of operational ease. It's got the best mix overall. And it really starts out more secure than a single database, as well as, and it reduces the complexity of managing yourself. So you have to use your best judgment, evaluate your choice. We're happy to help. Pragmatic Works has been doing this a long time. We're one of the leaders in Azure data environments, not just here, but we work with a lot of other data environments. We want to help you. So I just want to make sure that I want to give you our recommendation for what we consider the best option, but you have options, and it's really going to matter to look at the right option for whatever your use case is. But as a general rule, the managed instance option is the better option of all of the 3 that we presented today. All right, I believe there's some questions. So, Crystal, if you want to hit me up with questions, we'll go from there.
All right, let's see what you have here.
Unless I can see them. Hold on. Oh, look, I can see them. I found them, Crystal. I will actually look in here. Okay, I got 4 questions. The unable to see the screen, hopefully that's a problem went away. I can't help with that one. What has to be a source environment and SQL flavor that can be shifted? Okay, that's a really good question. Looks like Imran has already left, but I'll bring it up. Sorry, it looks like a couple people had some issues with my slides, so there's only really a couple things. Okay, so the source environment and SQL flavor that can be shifted. Azure SQL, so SQL Server 2008. Technically 2005, I think, can be moved as well. It's not as easy, but 2008 all the way through the latest version can all be moved. And what's really important that you can understand is that the flavor really, whether it's standard, enterprise, business intelligence, the versions they've given us for all the years, any of those can be moved right into managed instance for sure. Backup restore will take care of that. It'll set the compatibility level to a level that works for you, and you can change as you go along and fix your environment as you move forward. VMs will support, I believe, anything 2008 and above. There's a Microsoft special deal for that if you need support. One of their support options was to move to VMs. Azure SQL Database is your hardest move from that perspective, but anything else should be able to be shifted. Integration services catalogs in Azure. Oh, that I specifically did not talk about that. And the reason I specifically did not talk about that is because typically that is supported on Azure VMs is a great way to do that. But if you want to do it in Azure SQL Database, it is actually supported when you're using the SSIS runtime inside of Azure Data Factory. And that is a topic for another day. So I want to be really clear on that that is a much larger topic, and we have a lot of content around Azure Data Factory. I encourage you to look at what we have, reach out to us on that. Managed instances do support linked servers. I believe that was in the list. I would have to confirm that and get back to you, but I'm pretty sure they do. But I believe you're limited on linked servers to how you connect. I believe some of the open query options are only available. It's a limited functionality support, so just be aware of that when you go to jump into looking at linked servers. It's not straightforward. It's still, not the greatest thing. My preference, what I'm really looking forward to is Microsoft supporting Polybase in the managed instance or SQL database realm, because I think Polybase is our replacement for linked servers moving forward, and it will give us better options. All right, I have a SQL query which produces different execution plan in on-prem SQL Server and Azure SQL installed in a VM. What are the possible reasons? Wow, all right. That sounds like you want to open up a data help desk with us? Yes, I'm selling right now. Possible reasons for that? That is really hard to put a finger on. I'm assuming you're running all the same versions. It looks like you're running the same version, equivalent hardware. I don't know. And you might want to make sure you check build versions too. But that one is definitely a tuning deep dive, and I don't really have ability to answer that question just here. I know it's different. There's different. The environment's a little different, but I don't know why you'd be seeing that different query plan at this point. Unless, of course, you. Well, the only thing I can think of is if you are if all your statistics and everything like that need to be reset to get same equivalent, or reinstall on prem and just see what happens. Sorry, I don't have a good answer for that. Sorry. Under managed instance, is there a limit on the number of databases? Yes. I believe the limit is 100 databases per instance. And you basically create new instances. You go in and create it just like you think about installing a new instance. You'd actually go out and create a new managed instance. You go add a new managed instance to your environment. They don't see each other, just so we're clear. That's not like you can operate across those instances. You just create a new instance of managed instance. Hope that helps, Jim, what you're asking about there. All right, and if we secure the single database by applying VNet, do you still recommend to go to managed instance? Yes, I do. Typically, I recommend managed instance because of its functional equivalent and its ability to be more secure and eliminate the endpoint. That doesn't mean you are not secure running a single database. That's not the point. It really comes down to your security requirements. If you're operating inside the single database paradigm very well, it's going to be more cost effective at the end of the day to probably run in a single database, especially if you're running smaller. One thing you notice, we had a terabyte with 8 cores. You can actually run smaller instances of single database. So Mikado, that's one of those things that you'd be able to find in a cost saving standpoint. Since managed instance allows for SQL agent, couldn't SSIS be used from it? No. So SSIS, SSAS, SSRS are all separate installs and would need to be on VMs to be used, or if you're planning to use the Azure Data Factory, like I mentioned, for SSIS, then you can actually run it there. Agent is just used for executing jobs. It's not going to help you actually run SSIS, for instance. So you'd actually so when we work with people that have thousands of packages, for instance, in a migration scenario, We usually recommend first step, create a VM with to run SSIS until you've either converted to Azure Data Factory or have made a different decision how you want to actually run SSIS. But for now, the only way to run SSIS is either with the SSIS integration runtime at ADF if you want to run natively. Otherwise, it needs to be on VM. Can you share any thoughts on Azure Data Sync? I joined a little late. Okay, so absolutely use Azure Data Sync. We use it in a variety of scenarios, but it is a solid tool, and we use it for migration a lot, for smaller migrations in particular when we're moving, particularly when we're moving data that's not necessarily easy to migrate up. So I did not check on what's different in Azure Government Cloud. I don't believe anything I presented would not be available in Government Cloud. I think it's really a matter of the managed instance rollout, and that should be complete. So that should be good to go. How do you choose between Azure SQL Data Warehouse and managed instance? The number one choice there is, first of all, is it a data warehouse? That's number one. And number two is size. If you're moving a 40 terabyte data warehouse over, you're going to be in Azure Data Warehouse. You will not be a managed instance. It doesn't fit there today. It will, they're working on making that happen so you can do more of that. But realistically, if you can fit into Azure SQL Data Warehouse, you'll actually find it more cost effective than most of the SQL database solutions at equivalent size or better. Let's see here. Getting towards the end. We have SQL jobs, which execute the store procedure and dumps files to SDP server. You should be able to do that, because as long as the biggest thing you're going to have to do in understanding that is if the files are going to SDP server, you got to make sure that server is on the VNet, has access, and all those kind of things. That's going to be a lot of testing. You should be able to execute a store procedure and move files, but those files will not exist on your managed instance. That is going to be the biggest shift. So everything will have to be stored somewhere else, whether it's in Azure Blob Storage or in some type of share that you have set up. Whatever it is, you will not be able to do it the same way because you're now using a different storage mechanism because you're in the cloud. Regarding pricing costs, there are costs to consider mostly for hybrid and for I/O from Azure to on-prem. Yes, so it doesn't cost you anything to put your data into Azure. It costs you on the way out. And it's not substantial, but it will bite you if you have a really chatty system or if you're moving a lot of data all the time. So a lot of that has to do with how efficient you are moving data and keeping it, as compressed and as tight as you can. So when you are moving data, you're only moving what you absolutely need to. And I can't answer that. I am not on the Microsoft team, so will a simple model be available? My understanding in managed instance, based on everything I've read to date, is that it will not. So that simple recovery mode is not going to be an option because it automatically does all the backups and does a bunch of things automatically in the background for you that will prevent that from happening. You will always be in a full recovery style mode. That being said, keep in mind that that's related to how backups are executed, and backups are always being run in the environment. So there's not a whole lot of room there. All right, that is the last of the questions, and we're just about out of time, so I'm going to hand it back to Crystal and let her take it from here.
All right, thank you, Steve, and thank you so much for hosting. We really appreciate it. And like Steve was saying before, if you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to email myself or Steve. Thank you guys so much for attending. If you guys are looking to get into some great Azure stuff, we do have an Azure Data Week coming up. So if you guys want to take a look at that, I will put the link in the chat for you guys if you guys want to look into registering for that. But after that, you guys will receive an email link tomorrow in your email with the recording. So if you guys have any questions, like I said before, please reach out to me or Steve or myself and check out Azure Data Week. It's going to be great stuff. 4 days of jam-packed sessions, all based on your favorite Azure topics. So check it out. All right, thank you guys so much. Again, Steve, thank you for hosting, and you guys have a wonderful day.